So, Lauren, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Lauren Bairnsfather. I am the CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA and a long history of working in the field of Holocaust education.
And how was the Anne Frank Center USA founded?
So we have a really rich history. We were founded in the 1950s by Otto Frank and friends in order to raise money to open the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. Our first chair was Eleanor Roosevelt. So we have this very interesting American
From the Roosevelt
story.
family?
Yes, Eleanor Roosevelt was our first chair. Yes, and so that's how we began here. For a couple of decades, we were like an American Friends of Anne Frank House. So Otto Frank knew that in order to build a successful global movement to remember his daughter, he needed the United States. So this was the first foray into that. And then in the 1970s, we became a 501c3 in New York, and we were led by a Holocaust survivor, Jack Pollock, for decades and decades. And we lost him in 2015. So we had a long period of time where a Holocaust survivor from Amsterdam was really the guiding light of our organization.
That's actually interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm kind of wondering when did the Anne Frank House actually open? Because I didn't know that he had to raise funds to kind of get it to open in Amsterdam.
Well, they did. It was in a state of disrepair. So they needed to buy the house and repair the house in order to open it. And that happened later in the 1950s.
Wow. Why do you think Anne Frank's story resonates with so many people worldwide? Because I think at one point it was one of the most famous books in the world. It was The Diary of Anne Frank.
It is. It's read by millions of people around the world every year. It's translated into, I'm going to give you a number that's not exactly accurate, but let's say 70 languages.
Hmm.
All over the world, people connect to this story. And, when I took on this position in 2024 in January, I went back to the diary. I read it. I listened to it. I spent a lot of time with it. And Anne Frank was a really good writer. It seems kind of like a basic thing to say, but she was writing the diary. She received it for her 13th birthday. So she was writing when she was 13, 14, 15 years old. She wrote so well, and she's funny. I mean, all the things that you don't hear about this diary. Like, some people have told me they felt like they were invading her privacy, like reading the diary felt like something that they shouldn't have been doing,
Hmm.
but they couldn't put it down. So it's that she wrote in a way that you can connect to so easily. And that's true of people from all different backgrounds, many different ages. She's relatable.
How did Otto actually find her diary?
So after the people in hiding, so it was Anne Frank's family, her sister and parents, another couple, and their son, and then another man who was a dentist. So eight people were in hiding. And I'm not doing justice to all of those people with that brief overview, but that's where we are. So when they were discovered in August of 1944, and the place was ransacked very quickly, and everyone arrested, Miep Gies, who was one of the people who was bringing food and information to the Frank family and others in hiding, went into the space and saw the book itself, but many pages. So Anne Frank wrote constantly. So we generally associate the diary with the plaid book that she received for her 13th birthday, but she was writing on loose sheets of paper all the time too. Miep went into the room and gathered up everything that she could get of the diary and put it in a filing cabinet where it sat for the rest of the war until Otto Frank made his way back to Amsterdam. And upon learning that his daughters had died at Bergen-Belsen, Miep handed over the pages.
When did the diary actually launch kind of publicly? Around when?
It came out later in the 1940s. I mean, this book was available very quickly after the end of the war. And there's a whole incredible story about its publication and its reception in different parts of the world. There's a fairly recent book by an author named Ruth Franklin where she really tracks the discovery, the publication of the diary, and how it was received in different parts of the world.
Hmm.
So, very popular in the United States, not as popular in the UK, in the early days of its publication.
Why do you think it wasn't popular in the UK compared to the United States?
Yeah, the speculation is that the war was a different experience in the United States from what it was in the UK, with the bombing and everything that the UK went through. In the United States, we didn't have that experience. The war was not fought in the United States. So there was a real appetite to read about experiences during the war in the United States, and that same appetite did not exist in the UK because they had been through the war.
That actually does make sense. That does. And what would you say the Anne Frank Center does differently compared to other Holocaust remembrance organizations?
So the main thing we do that sets us apart, and thank you for the question, this is a hard thing for people to understand because most people outside of a school will not see our programs. So this is something that I'm working on all the time. How can we bring our programs to more people? We send teaching artists and arts educators, as well as actors, into schools. We do several performances for grades 4 through 12 and some at university level, two different performances that are drawn from the diary. And so for students, they are seeing a live performance and then they have a Q&A with the actor. The program we do for younger students is called Conversations with Anne. And for Conversations with Anne, it's about a 30-minute performance, language taken from the diary, all age appropriate for younger audiences. And then the actor stays in character as Anne and takes questions from the students. So it's really amazing. And then for older audiences, we don't have the actor in character as our lead actor and theater educator explains. We need to get the students when they still are willing to play,
Yeah.
right? And so when they're eighth grade and older, they're less willing to play. So it's just a different kind of conversation. The second performance is called Letters from Anne and Martin, which is text from the diary and text from Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And it's side by side monologues, but they wrote about many of the same themes. And they were both born in 1929, which is really shocking to most audiences.
Yeah. I think I've seen a lot of people do compare them. And what do you think about Anne Frank has very much become now a symbol she has, and so she's used kind of for everything. She is nearly at this point, and some people take offense to that and things like that. What do you think this kind of showcases just how known she's become and how much she's just become an icon for everything? Do you think it's kind of offensive when people might use her for kind of any cause, or why do you think that phenomenon exists?
I mean, I think it goes back to my previous response about how relatable she is. And so, I mean, famous, right? So people do kind of use and sometimes abuse her image and her memory to get a point across. Um, One thing that's really important to me as CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA is that we restore Anne for who she was when we're teaching about Anne Frank. I mean, I think there's a tendency to universalize, which is something that was really, it begins with the play in the 1950s, where um, with Otto Frank's blessing, certain things that Anne wrote about her Jewishness are not portrayed in the play. And so the universalizing of her story began in the earliest years of people interacting with Anne's diary. So I feel like we're working against, 70 plus years of attempts to make her into a symbol or make her into a universal message, and instead to say this was a Jewish girl from Frankfurt and this was her experience as she wrote about it. More Anne in Anne Frank education.
Well, how do you think it's even possible to even do a play, to old play about Anne Frank, while removing her Jewishness? I mean, it was kind of the main reason why she was murdered. It was.
I'm with you, but I mean, I think that this gets to a larger question about how we teach about anti-Semitism when we teach about the Holocaust. But it was possible. And at one point, there was a publication that called Anne Frank a normal Dutch girl. I mean, this was a German Jewish girl in hiding because she was Jewish.
Yeah, I think that's one interesting thing where I think a lot of people actually they're aware of Anne Frank, but they don't know that she's German. They actually think that she's Dutch. They do, and it also I think isn't there also another interesting thing. Didn't Otto? I may be wrong about this, but didn't Otto wasn't he part of World War I for Germany?
He was indeed, yes, he was a decorated World War One veteran.
And so again, because I'll be honest, I don't know everything about Anne Frank. I don't. So how did that actually end up in Amsterdam?
So I really think that this is such an important story that most people don't know. If Holocaust educators are listening or watching this, they'll know that a student will ask them, why didn't the Jews just leave?
Yeah.
And they'll put it like that. It will always be just leave, as if that were an easy thing. Well, Otto Frank really saw the writing on the wall. So already in 1933, he made plans to get his family out of there. Okay. And by that point, Otto Frank had three siblings. By that point, all of his siblings also had left Germany. And his brother was also a decorated World War One veteran fighting for the Germans. Okay, so that someone whose identity was really as a German,
Hmm.
which certainly that was Otto Frank's identity, for him to know already in 1933, as the Nazis rose to power, that he needed to get his family out of there was really significant. So they're an example of a German Jewish family that left as soon as they could. So he had a job in Amsterdam working for the same company that his brother-in-law worked for. And his Otto's sister and brother-in-law were in Basel in Switzerland by that point. So one brother went to France, one went to England, sister was in Basel. Their mother survived the Holocaust in Basel. And Otto took his family to Amsterdam. The Netherlands was neutral during World War One, and that was respected. So he had every reason to believe that his family would be safe in Amsterdam.
Because they assumed that since they were neutral, that the Germans wouldn't go and invade it, possibly.
Exactly. That should there be a war, Amsterdam would be a safe place.
Yeah, because that is something, yeah, which a lot of people don't kind of realize. Because I remember when I was directing Light and Darkness, like one of the big things which story-wise which we made was how basically the family couldn't get out to other countries because it was basically it wasn't possible to kind of immigrate or become refugees everywhere. Everywhere after the Avion conference, I think everyone was basically closing their borders. They were pretty
Yeah,
much.
it yes, I mean it became a situation where you had to, you know, make heroic measures, I'll say, to get out of a situation. I mean, there were still some opportunities, but yes, after Evian, everyone refused to take in Jewish refugees, or most countries refused to take in Jewish refugees. That included the United States.
Do you think
Yeah.
they were aware of what was happening, those countries?
Well, I mean, this is a really important question too, Luke, because this is the point where the Nazis came to power in 33. And between 33 and let's say November of 38, which was Kristallnacht, a national pogrom against Jews, also by that point in Austria, which had been annexed by the Nazis, and in part of Czechoslovakia, which had been annexed by the Nazis. The purpose of the Nazi persecution against the Jews to that point had been to get the Jews to leave Germany. This was not yet the Holocaust. So that's a
Hmm.
really important point too, because when we think about the Holocaust, we think about gas chambers and rail cars, and there's certain imagery that's very
Yeah,
powerful in our imaginations, but it's not
massive
the
extermination.
right.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, when do you think one could say the Holocaust really started?
I always point to Kristallnacht, November 1938. It's before the war began, but I always say that is the point where Jewish men all over Germany, Austria, and in the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia were arrested for being Jewish. There was mass destruction of Jewish businesses, synagogues were burned. It was clearly persecution against the Jews. To that point, there had been persecution of many different groups of people. And nevertheless, it was clear that there was something special. The Nazis were going after the Jews for sure. But Kristallnacht is the point where the Nazis realized they can do anything to the Jews and get away with it. No one's
Hmm.
going to stop them. So the war began September 1st, 1939, with the invasion of Poland. And by that point, there's already such dehumanization of Jewish people. So it doesn't take that much to get to the point of genocide.
Yeah, well, do you think that the way we kind of educate about Holocaust and all those things, because there has been multiple, because we've been doing this for decades kind of at this point, do you think it's worked? Do you think it's been effective? Because now we're seeing with, surveys put out from a claims conference and things like that, like younger generation is less and less aware, anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. What do you think could have gone wrong? Because again, a lot of people are trying to figure it out, and no one's kind of coming with answers. Everyone's talking about the problem, but no one's coming out with theories of, okay, this is maybe where we went wrong. This is maybe where we need to do things better. What is your opinion?
I have very strong opinions on this, and I'll say that, my work in this field began in the 1990s, at a time when there were so many Holocaust survivors still alive. And most of the work was done out of love for Holocaust survivors and a desire to honor them and preserve their stories. And so that's like my entry point into this work at all is through my relationships with Holocaust survivors. And we wanted to make sure that their stories were heard. And there was a belief that when someone heard the story of a Holocaust survivor, it was going to make them into a better person. It would make them into a person who wouldn't believe propaganda, who wouldn't dehumanize others, that we would create a kinder kind of society. Well, for some people that absolutely worked. So I'm not going to look at it and say like it didn't work because I meet people all the time whose lives were changed by an interaction with a Holocaust survivor. And already in the 1990s, we were worried about how we would do this work without survivors. And amazingly, in 2025, we still have Holocaust survivors. I don't think anyone imagined that that would be true.
It's actually interesting because me growing up in France, in rural France,
Mm,
didn't really meet many Holocaust survivors at all at school. They just showed us Schindler's List, and that was it. Basically, I met because also in France, a lot of Holocaust survivors basically fled and were in hiding. They were, and the Holocaust was different in France compared to other places. Like, majority of Holocaust survivors in France actually just went back to France after they did. So that's going to be it's a very unique case because a lot of French people they viewed the Vichy collaborative government as kind of like the occupying or illegitimate government. So they viewed this
yes,
as not really the French government. So that's kind of it's different compared to, say, Germany, of course, where it was the German government. So that's why a lot of Holocaust survivors just kind of went back to France. And, then we have kind of the whole story about the resistance, all those things, which again, it's kind of complicated. It wasn't exactly where all of France was suddenly the resistance. It's just the story which France likes to say because
right.
the Holocaust in France, French people, why they denied it for so long up until the 90s, until Chirac actually said, no, we were complicit. It's not because of anti-Semitism. It's more like the French were just incredibly ashamed of basically what had happened. But basically, but do you think because with America, it's interesting how Holocaust education has been done, where we're a big focus on survivors, and again, I come from an area in France where we didn't have any survivors really, or the people who did survive, a lot of them were just kind of like, oh, I was just they didn't view it as such a big deal. That was one fascinating thing, which when I was meeting survivors from my area in France, it's just because they were in hiding, so they didn't exactly themselves just feel as passionate, let's say, about compared to, Holocaust survivors in the USA, which immigrated over to the USA because, they really went through the worst over there. But one big thing which I find interesting, because again, in the case of Anne Frank, right, she's been so relatable, yet she's dead. I mean, she died in Bergen-Belsen. And that's become a more powerful story that has than, again, a lot of people who have survived the Holocaust. Again, not dissing Holocaust survivors. But do you think, I believe pretty much we should have been telling stories of many Anne Franks, we should have, alongside telling stories of survivors. And even today, right, I feel like with everyone kind of, freaking out because Holocaust survivors sadly are dying, they are, because they're becoming so old. Why do you think in America they haven't focused so much on the victims who died, pretty much, and have placed such a big focus on Holocaust survivors? Because again, I look at it like a rural area, let's say Kansas, right? How do they access a Holocaust survivor? Like that's it's Kansas, this is, but compared to New York, Los Angeles, and Florida, you can access them a lot easier. So that one thing I've always wondered is why didn't we as a collective think about middle America more? I don't quite know what happens in Holocaust education in middle America because all the museums are in the big cities or things like that.
Right.
How do you think they've been doing things within middle America? Do you think they've also been focusing on Holocaust survivors, or do you think they do things a bit more different?
So when Holocaust survivors came to the United States, they moved all over the United States.
Hmm.
So most parts of the country, where there were urban centers had Holocaust survivors. So like in Pittsburgh, I'm from outside of Pittsburgh. Inside Pittsburgh, there was a large Holocaust survivor community, but also in my town, outside of Pittsburgh, there was a Holocaust survivor community.
Oh, really?
So I
See,
mean,
didn't know
really,
that.
so there were, this is not an exact number, but let's say there were 90 regional Holocaust education centers. So while large museums are Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, and two in Texas, one in Cincinnati, there aren't that many large museums. There were a lot of small Holocaust education resource centers, which is what we had in Pittsburgh. So Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh was founded in 1980, which was one of the earlier ones. But there was a movement for Holocaust education across the United States since the late 70s, early 1980s.
And why do you think so many Holocaust survivors? It's a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Why do you think so many Holocaust survivors moved over to the USA? What made the USA in particular attractive to them? I mean, it's an obvious answer, but I'd like to know your thoughts.
I think there was always a sense that there was opportunity here. But there's another piece here that I don't hear people explain very often. But so I was born in the United States, so were my grandparents, so was one of my great grandparents. So for a Jewish family from the Russian Pale, we've been here for a long time. And I always like to call attention when we think about why in the United States, why was there this movement for Holocaust education? Why the focus on the survivors in the United States, where the Holocaust did not happen, right? I mean, this is a very important piece of the story where a lot of other terrible things happen that we haven't been so ready to educate about and acknowledge. Okay? That's maybe a sidebar. The families that came here from the Russian Pale, so the area of the Russian Empire that was along the western edge where Jews were made to live, and that included lots and lots of places. It was a large piece of land. So from like Lithuania, Latvia, all the way down to Macedonia, etc. Um, that was a wave of almost 2 million immigrants between 1880 and 1924. Most of the Jews in the United States descend from that wave of immigration. So when World War II was happening, um, the Jews in this country had very close relatives who were stuck in Europe. And maybe they had only left them one generation before.
Hmm.
So I always saw myself, I'll just give you an illustration, as like a very American Jew, not that connected to the Holocaust. And finally, 10 years ago, I asked my mother, what's our family's connection to the Holocaust? And she says that she was named for two great aunts who died in the Holocaust. So that's how close it is for Ashkenazi Jews, even if our families were here since 1900. Okay. So I feel like a lot of the effort that's been made to educate about the Holocaust comes from that deep loss of our very close relatives in the Holocaust and the inability of American Jews during World War II to do anything to help their family members.
Yeah, because I think I remember I even watched what's the name? It's a David Fincher film about this screenwriter who was Jewish, and it wasn't the main plot of the film, but one of the side plots was pretty much he was sending money over to try and get Jews out pretty much during the Holocaust, having difficulties
Hmm.
at the same time too. I mean, but also to say that is one very big difference compared to the USA to Europe, right? I feel like the USA, 'cause again, look, a lot of Jews immigrated over to the USA, didn't go through a Holocaust, while in Europe, the reality is this. I mean, just use example Poland. Jewish life has been wiped out. To me, that's one interesting thing which I noticed with some of the younger generation of American Jews in America who like to use some terms being like the Nazis did not win, we're strong, all those things. And to me, maybe it might be a controversial opinion, I think the Nazis did succeed. They did succeed in their genocide because just look at Poland. It's gone. It is. There's still Jews left, but was it 95%, I think, of Polish Jews got murdered during the Holocaust, the ones who were in Poland. So that's one thing which I find interesting too, is that America still feels a bit disconnected because they still can't, again, in Europe, like synagogues are empty, like neighborhoods are gone, they are, and it's very much still felt compared to America. And I think that's why, again, the younger generation doesn't quite get it. And how do you feel about the current wave of anti-Semitism? Do you think, like, recently, one statement which I disagree with, Johnson Greenblatt from the ADL recently said that this is the worst wave of anti-Semitism that we have seen in America in the past 100 years. I don't know if that's entirely accurate. Like, how do you feel about this current wave of anti-Semitism that's happening worldwide?
I mean, it's shocking to me because I grew up in a time when I didn't really experience anti-Semitism.
Hmm.
But if you know the history of the Jews in the United States, you know that not only was there anti-Semitism, it was institutionalized. Was, quotas on admission to universities, not being allowed into clubs and professions. I mean, there's a reason that there were Jewish hospitals in major cities because Jews couldn't go to a regular hospital and Jewish doctors couldn't practice medicine at other hospitals. So,
Oh, so
I
that's
mean,
what the hospitals which I knew, because I was always kind of wondering that, like, even myself, I was always like, okay, why does this hospital sound super Jewish?
yes, that's why that hospital sounds super Jewish. It's probably not anymore, but that's the history of that hospital. So it's important to know our own history. I think that there's been a movement away from knowing our own history, and I definitely see it among younger generations of Jewish people. And part of that, Luke, was part of the immigrant experience in the United States. So like our grandparents having made it through, and my parents even having made it through that era of quotas affecting where they could live. I mean, where I'm sitting right now is a neighborhood that was redlined against Jews purchasing property here.
Hmm.
So, yay me, I bought a house here. But I mean, that's our history in this country. But we didn't want to tell that story because we also had incredible opportunity in this country beyond what we had anywhere else. And what you say about the destruction of Jewish life in Europe is absolutely true. Two-thirds of the Jews of Europe were killed in the Holocaust. Two-thirds. So when we teach 6 million, which is a number no one can imagine, it's even harder to comprehend the near total devastation without knowing that there were 9 million Jews in Europe in 1933.
Well, and it's also interesting too, because one of my next projects is about the Holocaust in Libya. And one thing which I noticed very much with American institutions, Holocaust museums, all those things.
Mm.
I don't know if it's a DC museum because it's so big it is, but more like the smaller ones throughout LA and like other cities. Don't mention about the Holocaust in North Africa, where again, the Jews of North Africa, the reason why they weren't able to commit mass extermination on such a scale compared to Europe is because the sea, pretty much. It was just harder to kind of get them all to basically deport them over there. And then
Hmm.
plus you also had the British who were fighting pretty much in Libya too. So, it wasn't as easy. And one big thing which this has very much remained towards me, it has, where I was once at this one Holocaust museum, which I won't mention, talking with one of the educators, and the CEO entered the room, and we just talk about Algerian Jews, and she asked the question, "Oh, are Algerian Jews Jewish?" It seemed like she just didn't really seem to understand, and that's one thing which I've never wondered. Like, there hasn't been in America much talk about what happened to Sephardic Jews during the Holocaust. Like, say, for example, in Greece, I think it was 90% of Sephardic Jews were murdered in Greece. And again,
Yes.
the Holocaust in North Africa, what I believe it's important to talk about, is because anywhere where the Nazis and their allies had hand in, pretty much, they would start the extermination. They would. But yeah, why do you think there hasn't been such a focus to kind of talk about how it also was happening in North Africa? Because again, that makes a lot of young people view things distorted. Because I see at times these are horrible things which people say online where they're like, oh, the only reason why we care about the Holocaust is because it happened to Europeans and all those things when it happened also in North Africa. Why do you think there just hasn't been such a focus on, at least within museums, saying no, it also happened in North Africa, it happened everywhere where the Nazis got their hands on?
So I do have some thoughts about that, but I also want to add that when I first got started in this work, I told you it was Holocaust survivors working on something completely different. I met two Holocaust survivors. This is when I was an undergrad in college, and it was a woman from Salonika from Greece and a woman from Rhodes. And I think 17 Jews survived from Rhodes.
Hmm.
So my point of entry is this very unusual Sephardic point of entry and the stories of women, which are still undertold in the history of the Holocaust. But why did we learn so much about Jews from Eastern Europe and the Holocaust is because that's where most of the Jews in the world lived and where most of the victims of the Holocaust came from, and therefore most of the survivors. So as we built up how we educated about the Holocaust in the United States based on survivors, the survivors we had were from Poland, Hungary, Romania, smaller number from France, smaller number from Germany. The Jewish population of Germany was tiny in 1933. It was like 0.6% of the population. It's pretty hard to believe. So that's why, Luke. And I agree with you that it's to our detriment because we could have been telling much more diverse stories of the Holocaust, important stories of the Holocaust that would have demonstrated something that I'm very passionate about teaching, which is the diversity of the Jewish people, the Jewish diaspora. So if there's a stereotype about Jews, it definitely is a European Jew, but we lived all over the world.
Yeah, well, there even is kind of cultural differences because now we talk about stereotypes, right? Like in America, there's definitely because of comedians, right? Comedians are definitely very much an Ashkenazi stereotype, which is, let's say, Larry David, pretty much,
Mhm.
But Sephardim, like in France, right? The stereotype is a lot more different. The stereotype is more similar to basically kind of like how people view the Italians in America. That's how people view the Sephardim, pretty much with big sunglasses, loads of gold chains, things like that, and kind of just getting loads of bottles at the nightclub and everything and trying to hit on girls. Well, basically, Jersey Shore is kind of the stereotype of Sephardim in France. So that is kind of what is interesting it is because yes, there's different kind of. I mean, even again, also if you look at during the Holocaust, like yeah, even if you look at basically the victims from North Africa and things like that, you can really see that they're Sephardic too. But one thing which I found very interesting, right? Because nowadays we jump into race about everything. We just do in America. America's obsessed with race. They are. And when a lot of Americans, like I remember Whoopi Goldberg when she was kind of like, it was white on white crime, something like that, right? When I look at photos from the Holocaust, you can really tell just within Germany who the Jews were and who the Germans were, pretty much. The Germans, again, not everyone kind of, looks the same. Of course, there's blonde Jews and all those things there is, but you could really tell you could. And that's one interesting thing with America, where they view race and racism with a skin-based kind of color thing, while in Europe and also the Holocaust was more, dare I say, kind of ethnic based it was, where again, because you could be like, they had similar kinds of skin colors, the Nazis did all those kind of images and things like this, is how you
Yes.
recognize a Jew. And at the same time too, I was very much, again, if you look at Germany, which are Nordic type people, right, and Jews which are darker featured, mean darker hair and more Middle Eastern type features, because one of the big things which some people may view as controversial or not necessarily, how the Nazis and neo-Nazis always go with the nose things and things like that. While to me, it's kind of like, well, guys, if you go to the Mediterranean, right, the Greeks, the Italians, all those things, and Jews, which also are come from a Mediterranean,
Yes.
it's ethnic. It is. It's just. It's It's not Nordic. It isn't. So that's been one very interesting thing with America. And why do you think? Why do you think, despite all those things, because we even shown, the Holocaust was a racial genocide, all those things, why do you think in America there's just right now just such a tension and also very much going, because we all know about the far right, we do, they're very easy to spot, they are, and that's of course because of Holocaust education. I believe that's coming, it's easier to spot the far right. But why do you think the far left have kind of very much gone off towards hating Jews and actually being borderline acting like Nazis? Like a lot of them now go into race science and basically where they're kind of like, no, the Jews are from Europe pretty much. They need to all go back to Poland and things like that. Why do you think the far left has jumped into borderline Nazi rhetoric?
I think that once you go really far to the left or far to the right, you practically meet each other. And it's not new to me. I think we're seeing it now. It's much more visible now, I'll say. But my frame of reference for a lot of these things, including the where did Holocaust education not do what we thought it was doing, is the Tree of Life attack in Pittsburgh in 2018. As at the time, I was the executive director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. So I was an like, on the ground Jewish community professional running a public space,
Mhm.
and we became a space that people visited because they needed somewhere to go. So the community trauma is something that like, I was very much immersed in after the shooting at the Tree of Life, where 11 people were killed. And in that moment, we focused and learned a lot about far right extremism. But over the couple of years that followed, I also saw a lot of, I'll just say, progressive, far left kind of anti Semitism, which was based on the belief of, for one, white privilege for Jews, that we are not a persecuted minority,
Again,
even
being kind
though
of very skin based
very
color.
much skin based, and also like the opportunities that we've had in the United States. But most of it is connected to the belief that if you're Jewish, um, it reminds me so much of Nazi ideology, Luke, because for the Nazis, Jews were not individual people, we were a group. And this is the same kind of thinking that Jews are a group that is of European descent, is privileged and white, and therefore is complicit, guilty in persecution of people of color. and there's a big umbrella over what people of color mean.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this kind of thinking, which for me, put me in some uncomfortable conversations with people that I think I would agree with about a lot of other things. But on this, I would not budge. People were anti-Semitic, believing things about Jews that are not true, and also
Well,
just creating a dangerous, dangerous climate of anti-Semitism for Jews. Among the problem, Luke, I know I'm kind of all over the place here, is that that kind of anti-Semitism that comes from that movement is creeping in to mainstream politics. It's a very dangerous situation for Jews. And so when somebody says it's the worst climate of anti-Semitism we've ever seen in this country, it's the worst climate of anti-Semitism I've seen in my lifetime.
yeah, in Lifetime, I think
Because
that's
my
right.
lifetime is after the quotas, is at my lifetime is what felt like no anti-Semitism. I mean, I could look back and say, well, that kind of was, but no. I mean, I felt like I grew up in a climate where I could be Jewish, proudly so, and nothing was stopping me.
But do you think this anti-Semitism kind of was already there and kind of starting to brew even before the war in Israel and Gaza? Do you think it was always starting to kind of brew, and then once that kind of hit, it just opened up the floodgates for it?
Yes. Yes, because the propaganda that has influenced campus protests and other movements since the war did not begin with the war.
You know, it has been interesting because again, once October 7th happened and the war kind of started, everything just started exploding everywhere. It did, and again,
Hmm.
what's interesting too is that most American Jews don't support the war and also are extremely critical of the Israeli government. You could argue that it's American Jews in general who are more critical of the Israeli government than any other group, and yet kind of everyone from the far, not everyone, but actually everyone from the far left, because they're the far left, started blaming again American Jews. And one of the big things which gets again getting a bit controversial now, which gets pushed out online, is that basically people like to portray this kind of narrative that the oppressors, no, the oppressed become the oppressors, pretty much again kind of blaming all Jews for what's happening in Gaza. And do you think that comes basically from the far left spaces where they first started doing all these things, and now they're just basically blaming, doing collective blame on all Jews worldwide?
This is where I see the similarity to Nazi ideology that didn't see individuals. Because in this current of ideology, a Jewish person is part of a group, is, I think, a Jewish person equals Israel
Yeah.
in this kind of thinking. But it's not Israel as it truly exists. It equals like the war in Gaza. And it's connected to so many ways that Jews were persecuted over millennia. I mean, we need to learn a deep history to really get this stuff, but the blood libel, um, blaming Jews for the murder of Christian children. Well, now one Jew is responsible for a child dying in Gaza.
Yeah, well, what it reminds me of more because you know, a lot of American Jews compare what's going on to the beginning of the Holocaust and things like that. I don't. I actually think the more apt comparison is after 1948, where basically, you know, there was the war between, counter units for to create the state of Israel and between the Arab armies and all those things. And what happened was the surrounding Arab countries started persecuting their Jews when the state of Israel was founded, and then started taking things from them, kicking them out, all things like that. And that's again, a lot of American Jews aren't aware of that period. They aren't, pretty much, of the 800,000 Jewish refugees, because got blamed for the state of Israel. even if they were, say, for example, just living in Libya and just being like, I'm just in Libya, what has got to do with me? Basically, that's what I've kind of noticed a bit more, kind of happening. But why do you think it's so unique? The kind of anti-Semitism just keeps on coming back, and even within the far left, pretty much. Because what's fascinating, if you look online now, when you see on X, Twitter, and a lot of progressives actually talk about this, where they're like, "Yeah, I've never seen so much anti-Semitism. This is kind of really bad." Yeah, why do you think just the far left pretty much jumped into Nazi ideology and just very much because if you remember, couple of years ago, the far left used to call everyone a Nazi. They did, anything they disagreed with, or some things which are really bad, they would call it Nazism. Well, I was like, no, Nazism is very particular and very focused on exterminate the Jews. It was, and the Romani people to which they exterminated. But Nazism, they're racist, but say, for example, they were okay with Arabs. They weren't wanting to exterminate the Arabs. They weren't, pretty much. That's how come you had a lot of Arab people like Algerians who were actually part of the Nazi army and things like that. Yeah, why do you think the far left, or just people in general, it's so easy for them to jump into this Nazi ideology, even if they weren't grown up within it?
I mean, I don't think that this is specifically a comment about the far left or anyone's political beliefs, but it's a comment about how we think about things now in 2025, where people are not comfortable with complexity. They want things to be black and white or good and bad. And so there's no room for the true complexity of human existence.
Hmm.
And so it makes it easier to say um, this group is bad. And for millennia, like I said, Jews have been blamed for everything bad that happens. So this is a very easy move. This is not like anything that came out of the blue. This is how anti-Semitism has functioned over thousands of years. And this is why I'm always like, we need to learn our own history. And part of that is the history of our persecution. Yes, we lived all over the world. There's a reason we're not all over the world now. We got kicked out of everywhere, but the
Hmm.
United States, but Israel, and, populations all over the world in very small numbers. But most of the Jews in the world are in the United States or Israel at this point. So, I mean, that happened through historical movement over time. But, a fixture, a main feature of Jewish existence in Europe in medieval times was being blamed for something and the whole community gets killed. And that happened all over Europe. So the fact that there are any Jews still alive is a miracle. It's something that I think we should be celebrating, but recognize when it's historic beliefs that are fueling a new wave of anti-Semitism, no matter where it's coming from on the political spectrum. And most people are vulnerable to believing conspiracy theories, especially if we want the headline or we're really outraged by the latest thing that should be outraging us. And we need to react really quickly because that's how everything works now. Everything is breaking news. And the war in Gaza, which has been broadcast and just constantly, we're hearing about it all the time and we're seeing terrible photos and footage all the time. I find it very hard to trust any sources of information in this moment. Um, but many people are taking whatever information they're fed, and we know that that is really it's on an algorithm.
And
So
also what's interesting too to mention the war in Gaza is 70% of Israelis want the war to end and just do the full hostage deal. Like majority of Israelis are just they've just had enough of this war. And American Jews have also very much what want the war to end too. So you have basically majority of Jews worldwide who are saying stop this war, pretty much. But yet it seems like again, majority of the not majority, but majority of the anti-Semitism we're seeing online, things like that, they're still blaming Jews and saying they want to continue the war, they want to murder everyone, all those things. When again, majority want it to stop. I mean, the people actually fighting to stop the war the most are the Israelis within Israel, where it's basically daily protests to stop that war. why do you think that information hasn't managed to very much get out to the American public? Because I kind of feel like people who are anti the war, which I am, should be supporting pretty much the majority of Jews and Israelis who want the war to end, because they basically have the same goals, but yet they seem more focused on being instead blaming all Jews for Netanyahu's actions.
It doesn't fit the narrative. I think that's it. It doesn't fit the narrative. I know that what you say is true because I seek out that information.
Hmm.
But if I didn't seek out that information, where would I find it?
But why also do you think it's become so anti-Semitism's become so okay and kind of mainstream now? So of course, in America, they they do really go after anti-Semitism as much as they can, but just within the general public, it's become more okay. And I'm not talking about things like being, for the Israeli government and things like that, because that's a government thing. I don't necessarily think that's anti-Semitism, but just pure old school kind of anti-Semitism, which a lot of people have been kind of okay with. Why do you think it's just become mainstream now that people are just so okay with everything? Like, yet even people who for like decades weren't like that, and now they've just kind of all gone out within the mainstream.
I think it's always been there, and now there's been sort of a permissiveness. People feel like they can express it, but
And
it's
do you
not new. It's not new.
and do you think because what we're seeing right now, because even saw there's this private school in Virginia recently who they basically started removing these Holocaust survivors from speaking and things like that. Like, one, why do you think that is happening? Because again, they're just removing. Because it's happening also in the UK very much, where they're again not having Holocaust survivors speak and things like that. Now, lots of people seem to not really care that much about the Holocaust. Why do you think that is kind of happening?
Honestly, I'm not seeing that. I mean, there's interest in our programs is greater than it was before. It's not,
That's
yeah,
that,
no.
that's actually good because what I see on the news a lot of times is all those actually. So why do you think you guys actually, instead of a lot of some organizations things that are actually losing things, why do you think you guys are growing and seeing more interest?
I think the nature of our programs that go right into schools, this is an early question that you asked me during this conversation. 29 states either mandate or recommend Holocaust education. So 29 of 50 states. And so schools are expected to have some level of Holocaust education, which could be 3 hours. I mean, it's not necessary, it's not a Holocaust course.
Yeah.
But teachers still need to fulfill that requirement. And we offer programs that go directly into schools. It's not a program that trains the teachers and requires extra effort from the teachers. It's a program that supports a teacher with a quality Holocaust education lesson. And so I think that's why. I mean, we help a school to meet something that they're required to do with a program that reaches students. We are evaluating our programs. This is another thing about Holocaust education because we believed that it was character development, that it was going to bring behavioral change, but we didn't do longitudinal surveys for years and years that would have proved that what we were doing was working. We had anecdotal evidence, but now we have evidence of changed attitudes and that the programs work. So if schools are required to do this and we bring them something that the students respond to, and it's easier for a teacher to implement, and we know it's good quality, I think that all of those things combined have contributed to increasing demand for our programs.
And since I've talked about lots of negative things, I want to end at least with something more positive. What is your hope basically for Holocaust education and the way we can reduce anti-Semitism? Because that's one big thing which I'm again not seeing within legacy and things like that. I see a lot of negativity, but no kind of hope for a path forward. How do you see kind of Holocaust education heading? And two questions in one. And also, how do you think we can reduce anti-Semitism?
Two, two big questions, and we didn't get into this too much, but one thing that Holocaust education didn't do is educate about the long history of anti-Semitism. We
Yes.
educated about Nazi anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it felt
So
like it's very isolated. Like a lot of
I
people think it was just an isolated incident.
so we isolated the Holocaust from Jewish history, from global Jewish history, from the history of the diaspora and anti-Semitism. So, I mean, it is my hope that we will take advantage of the opportunity to teach more about the Jewish experience, not only Jews being killed, but Jews living in all the places that we did. But also, another thing that we did that, looking back, I think we can do better is we separated the Holocaust from other subjects in history. So I went to someone I admire very much who was a kindergarten teacher, and now he's a school administrator. And I asked him, what is too young to learn about the Holocaust? And you and I have talked about this too.
Mhm.
What is too young? And he said that they teach about slavery in second grade. I mean, it is age appropriate. They're not, it's not going to be the mural sized horrific liberation photos when you teach about the
Yeah.
Holocaust in second grade. But by separating it from other stories of persecution, we made it not relatable. And this is one of the things that in the United States, I think it hasn't hit correctly because so many people have experienced, they have their own histories of persecution, many of them inside the United States. And then they learned about the Holocaust that happened in Europe. It didn't happen here. Usually the United States is painted as the hero, saved the world in World War II.
Yeah.
And it didn't connect with other things that students were learning. We can do a better job of connecting it.
Well, I think that's actually interesting because, yeah, because again, the Soviets very much helped defeat Nazi Germany, but they were anti-Semitic. They
And then
were.
it was the Cold War, so we weren't going to talk about that. I mean, even when
Yeah.
I was growing up, it was still the Cold War. So, I mean, no, that was not going to work for many reasons. But as far as educating about anti-Semitism, I've had a lot of thoughts on this. I began by teaching a more like a history of the diaspora, 4,000 years. And I think that the goal there is teach the Jewish experience, humanize Jews. I mean, even on October 8th, 2023, I saw a dehumanization of Jews immediately. Everything that we're talking about, denying what happened on October 7th, despite the video evidence, but also already talking about Jews as a group of people and not as individuals, based on a limited scope that doesn't include North African Jewish experiences, doesn't include the global sweep of Jewish history. So I thought that's where I wanted to start. But then I learned something that we haven't explicitly stated, although hinted at, which is a belief that Jews are murderous people, that our intentions in Gaza are to kill all of the Palestinians. And I felt like no amount of teaching about Jewish history, if that is what people believe, no amount of teaching Jewish history can counter that kind of thinking. So as
Yeah.
far as fighting against anti-Semitism, I think we don't need to go back to the drawing board entirely, but we need to think differently because I always think when we humanize each other, when we tell our human stories and can see each other and all our humanity, that's how we end this kind of hatred. However, I think we're up against something larger than I realized and larger than most people are willing to admit, and it's going to take a different kind of approach.
Well, it's actually interesting. Again, you mentioned the war in Gaza. So, what I believe again is kind of showcasing more how the Israelis are fighting back. Like even recently today, there's been massive protests and arrests there have of mothers of soldiers who are protesting against the war. They are so lots of arrests basically in Tel Aviv, and I believe in basically pushing those kind of things. But then lots of people come to me to kind of push back and be like, "Oh, you're trying to showcase good Jews versus bad Jews and things like that." Well, I kind of basically believe no, it's just a fact of what's happening. It is like we have to show the facts, which are
Mhm.
the Israelis are kind of pushing back, and lots of them. There's even some people inside the army who are like, "What are we doing?" kind of thing. I mean, there's been all those letters signed because again, it's the leaders that decide to do those things. So basically, Netanyahu's government, it is, which again, it's been shown, the extremist was in the government that Smotrich, if there's re-elections, he has 0%. He does now. And also another complex thing is why this extremist government got into power is because a lot of people, a lot of the liberals basically decided not to vote in the last election, like a lot of people from Tel Aviv. They didn't, which again brings it similar to the United States, where, in some elections, pretty much lots of the left are like, oh, I've had enough. And then someone more right wing basically gets. So again, it's more complex and it's basically more similar to the USA. It is pretty much where, why certain people gained power and things like that. And that's what's been, yeah, interesting because, again, like I said, I get pushback for actually showing really what's happening, but basically in among Israeli society. So that just so that's what I mean. It's kind of complex, and then they feel like within our own community, like sometimes some people feel like some things are anti-Semitism, some things aren't. Like I give an example. So pretty much there's that music festival right in the UK where that one guy said basically kill these people. And this other guy, pretty much, he said, fuck Netanyahu, he did. And I pretty much did a quote tweet. I was like, yeah, this isn't anti Semitism. This is completely okay to say fuck Netanyahu. Like, my whole Twitter is basically fuck Netanyahu, the Netanyahu regime. Like, I go off on it. And that was one interesting thing where a lot of people basically viewed it as anti Semitism. So I feel like at times, maybe some people are scared, end up being scared of everything and thinking everything is anti-Semitism, or sometimes you wonder if some Netanyahu supporters are actually using X, one of these things. So I feel like everything's become very much complicated and kind of a disaster to kind of help navigate. It has very much now. And but do you think, again, as sort of someone an anti-Semitism educator and all those things, do you feel like it's okay for people to kind of, when everyone's blaming all the Israelis, pretty much, calling all the Israelis baby killers, things like that, and again, it's not majority of Israelis in the war in Gaza. There, it's just not. Do you think that's again perpetuating stereotypes? If some people come out and like, no, it's not all the Israelis doing this, and when they're like, okay, there's some bad Israelis, like how there's bad Americans, there is. Do you think that's perpetuating anti-Semitic stereotypes when you're trying to explain to people, no, it's just a few people are doing these really bad things. It's the government and things like that. Do you think that's
don't think that there's an interest in that, to be blunt. I don't think there's interest in hearing a story other than the main story that we're being told, which doesn't consider individual Israelis just as much as it doesn't really consider that many individual Jews. It's there's a narrative that's already been written, and we're not hearing very much that moves us away from that. I just don't think there would be that much interest,
Mhm.
unfortunately, because we things are moving really fast. We have one, I mean, people believe one thing here, and I don't know that there's much openness to hearing something different. And I mean, when I think that as far as the word anti-Semitism, we've struggled for years to come up with a definition. There's the IHRA definition, there's which some countries have adopted. It was a working definition. It was not meant to be used that way, but it's
Mhm.
being used that way. It's being used as a device, where a place can demonstrate its commitment to fighting anti-Semitism by endorsing the IHRA definition. People wrote other definitions, but in none of them in the top paragraph is there anything about scapegoating or conspiracy theory. And to me, that is how anti-Semitism works, as blaming the
Really?
Jews, yes, and as, believing that there's an international global Jewish conspiracy. So, I mean, I think we're pretty far from defining and really understanding in a paragraph how anti-Semitism works. Plus, it's been deployed in so many different ways now. I feel like the word is losing its meaning. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a word from the 1800s that was coined to refer to persecution of Jews, but it was for the people who believed in it, a positive way to persecute Jews. They had the League of Anti-Semites that people were members of. I mean, that's where the word comes from. I mean, we've rejected a lot of
the
words
League
that
of
have that kind of origin.
Anti-Semites. That
Yes,
sounds like very bad Marvel villains.
yes. I mean, really, good idea. Marketable. No, I think that, we've rejected a lot of words that have that kind of origin, but we haven't rejected that word, even though its meaning is not clear at this point.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean that is a good point because again, it is conspiracy theories. Like a lot of it, it is like you can even see like how they base a lot of people basically believe there's a Jewish lobby, there's all those things pretty much. And again, for someone who's worked behind the scenes on a lot of things, I can say that uh, even the big Jewish organizations have a hard time getting anything done. They do very much. I mean, even I've noticed in Hollywood too, like I work with some organizations which are against anti-Semitism and they can't get anything done. They can't. I've really seen behind the scenes how that all works. And also some conspiracy theories, yeah, it can morph all the times kind
Yeah,
of non-stop. So
that's
it's
it.
near impossible it is. And again, what's been interesting with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance of Anti-Semitism, right? Some people have said with that one, you can no longer criticize the government of Israel. But I'm like, no, no, no. France has it adopted, right? And Macron is among one of the biggest critics
Yes.
worldwide right now of the Israeli government. And there's a lot of even far left people in France. And France has very strong hate speech laws. And they have not been put in jail or anything. So that definition, in my mind, is not as dangerous as what some people think. For example, like so, it still allows you to very much criticize the actions of Netanyahu and all those things. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't read the definition. I haven't because there's
Yeah, I
so
mean,
many
it says
definitions.
some criticism of Israel, by which they mean, if you're holding Israel to a standard that you're not holding any other country in the world to, if you have a unique interest in what Israel does, but you're not paying any attention to Sudan, say, um, then that's what they were referring to. But yes, the critical response to the IHRA definition is exactly what you describe.
Yeah, yeah, because what I've noticed is just again like because I am super critical. I'm among probably within the legacy space, all those things like or anti-Semitism space among the one of the most critical people of the Netanyahu government. I am. I mean, I actively even was in Congress, do things to actively go after Netanyahu's government to get a hostage deal and end this brutal war. And yeah, haven't like been to it. It is possible to be extremely critical and even despise the Netanyahu government and despise Ben Gvir, despise Bibi and everything, right? Without descending into being a racist against all Jews. It is, and that's one thing which I feel also in terms of the people because I don't think because again I think it's wrong to portray anyone who opposes the war or anyone on the pro-Palestine side as anti-Semites. That's that's blanketing kind of everyone. But it is possible to be so critical and even go very far, even say it's criminal, things like that, without descending it into anti-Semitism. It is. But yeah, any last words of hope which you would like to tell people?
Yeah, so I want people to know I feel I'm very lucky as the CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA because I get to meet a lot of young people in different parts of the country doing extraordinary things. And so this is what gives me hope that there's still an interest in improving the world.
Mm-hmm.
So as there's an 11-year-old in Minnesota, one of the things that the Anne Frank Center does that I haven't mentioned is we award trees that are grown from the tree that grew outside of the hiding place in Amsterdam.
Oh, that's where the I'll be honest, I was always wondering why the I'm very knowledgeable on some things I'm not at all. I always wondered why the tree.
So Anne Frank wrote about the tree 3 times in her diary, but then in additional writings that are not published in the diary or in a different publication, she talked about her sort of growing interest in nature. So the program with the trees started at Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and Anne Frank Center USA was awarded a certain number about 15 years ago. And an arborist in Indiana has continued to grow more trees from the original tree through grafting. So they're genetic identicals to the tree in Amsterdam. Pretty cool. Pretty cool, right? So, so, so we've planted them. They're now growing in 21 places in the United States. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you of two that we did this year, both at schools. One is at a school in Fairmont, Minnesota, a town of 10,000 people, where an 11-year-old was so inspired by Anne Frank that she started a movement. I stand with Anne, put a stop to hate. And so she gives me hope all the time. And I met her last year. I was with her in Minnesota when we dedicated the tree in May, and just amazing young people who do not have hate in their hearts and who are stepping up as leaders already, even at a young age of 11. The second tree story I'll share, we just dedicated a couple weeks ago in Spokane, Washington, at a school that's named for a woman who, Carla Pepperzak is her name. She's 101 years old. She was a classmate of Margot Frank's, Anne's older sister. And she is Jewish. She was able to get the J removed from her ID in Amsterdam, and as a teenager, worked to hide Jews. So she knew in her mind where all of the Jews were hiding on farms in the countryside. And she's this amazing example of resistance and acting when you have the moment. And I asked her about it. She said she doesn't know if she had been older with other responsibilities, if she ever would have done what she did. And so now there's a school named for her in Spokane. It's a middle school, and all of the students who go to that school will learn from her example. So we have a program that we do that is very hopeful. And when you plant a tree, you don't plant it for yourself because it takes
Hmm.
decades for it to reach its full size. And so it's a hopeful message for the future.
But I know it's meant to end, but I kind of want one last thing. But do you think why Anne's story resonates so much, and why, say, compared to a lot of other organizations which have nothing but a lot of horror stories, pretty much about how things are going bad, do you think why things are going good is because also Anne offers basically hope? So then basically to people it's easier to relate or to do things when you have a sense of motivation, when you're like, yes, we can change the world for the better. Do you think that's what maybe resonates a lot more? Because when you talk about all these students, creating these movements, things like that, it feels like
Yes.
they're kind of creating it for hope. Because if you went to students who are like, no, everything's bad and everyone's going to hate the Jews and we're all doomed, kind of thing. Like, do you think that's also why it's resonating really well?
I think that one thing that really gets through to students is that they're reading an author who's their age. And, she's expressing the same kind of thoughts and concerns that they may have as well. She's jealous, but admires her sister. She's fighting with her mother, all of these things. But yes, she did have a hopeful message. The other thing is that the diary ends before they were captured.
Hmm.
And I don't know of her writing, after they were caught and sent to Westerbork and then deported to Auschwitz, which we don't hear a lot about her time there, and then sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she and her sister both died. We don't have her thoughts from that period. So we have a snapshot of how she was thinking about the world when she was still hopeful. They knew that the Allied armies had attacked Normandy. They knew that the Allies were coming. I mean, they
Hmm.
knew that they were close to being liberated. And the train that deported them from Westerbork to Auschwitz was the last train to leave Westerbork. I mean, that's how close they were to surviving.
Mm.
We know that, but Anne didn't know that when she was writing. So yes, it is hopeful. It shows the triumph of a young girl overcoming her circumstances. And I think that's a message that really resonates with people who read it. And they get from that that they too can overcome their circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you, Lauren, so much for speaking with us.
Yeah,
Saying
thank
that.
you. A great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I always have to jump into politics, I do at some point. But yes, and thank you so much. And where can people find out more about your work?
We are at annefrank.com, and our website talks about our programs. And we've been in the news a lot. You can Google us and get some coverage of the plantings that we've done. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and we have kind of a fledgling LinkedIn profile that we would love to have more people paying attention to that too. So, yeah, lots of ways to learn about us and interact with us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lauren.
Thank you.